Welcome back to Principles in Practice. I am your host, Chris Heslip, and this week we are talking with my friend Rick Holliday on creating a learning culture within your organization. Rick is one of the 6 founders of North Point Ministries, where he leads the finance and operations teams. Keep listening as Rick shares about how having a learning culture is about maintaining the right balance between delegating responsibility and holding people accountable. We'll also hear from Rick about how they build their team to be a mix of entrepreneurs, technicians, and managers, and how successful teams need a balance of all three. Well, hey everyone, welcome to Principles in Practice. It is an incredible honor to have my good friend and one of the best leaders I've ever had the chance to meet, Rick Holliday, join us. Rick, thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me, Chris. I look forward to hanging out with you for a bit.
Absolutely. Well, tell us a little bit about how you came to North Point. I mean, you were there from day one. Tell us a little bit of the story.
Well, there were 6 of us that were on staff at First Baptist Church of Atlanta, where Charles Stanley was until recently the lead pastor. He's now the pastor emeritus. And us and a group of others were a new way of doing church that we were offered at the North Campus, which is now the home of First Baptist Atlanta. And we developed a team there. And then as things moved away from First Baptist Atlanta, we had the opportunity to start North Point. There were 6 of us that were friends and coworkers that had been involved in what we did at the North Campus of First Baptist Atlanta that started at North Point. Preeminent among those, obviously, is Andy Stanley, and then 5 of us that worked with him. But he's been the leader since the beginning. We've been the followers, and but it's been a great team effort. And then I've been in the role that I'm in, some version of it, CFO, COO, since the beginning. My current title is Executive Director of Central Services. And the way the quick and easy way our organization is organized is that there's one person that's responsible, Lane Jones, for all the campuses. And then I'm responsible for all the central team efforts of the organization. And both of us report to Andy.
Fantastic. And so back then you got given kind of the North Atlanta part. For those who aren't so familiar with Atlanta, was it farmland back then? I mean, it wasn't what it is today.
No, where our first campus is in Alpharetta. I grew up in Atlanta and I'd never heard of Alpharetta. That's how small it was. And so as we look north, and Atlanta has grown predominantly northward, the little outpost of Alpharetta, Georgia, which we had no idea what it would become, had a new mall being built in it, and we thought it would be a good place to gather. That was sort of the strategy back in that day. Everybody remembers malls, right? And so we found a piece of land near there, and that was far enough away from First Baptist Atlanta's primary campus that everybody was happy. So that's how we ended up where we are.
I love it. And I mean, you have just an incredible culture at North Point. Take us back to those early days. Did you set out to build a learning culture, or was it something that just kind of happened? You know, what was the background to the culture that you built?
I think the basis of the learning culture that you've observed, and I do agree, we don't talk about it that much externally, but internally, there always has been a desire to learn. Even before North Point began, we used to sit around at the original House of Pancakes across from Piedmont Hospital and read books together. And we did what all young leaders would do. We talked about what we would do if we were in charge, right? Just like our young leaders in our organization do. I totally understand that. But buried in there was the desire to learn, to grow, to have community, to learn how to do things better. And we were learning even then. And so that was a natural outgrowth into the new organization that we continued to learn together. And we've always said because the way we are wired is to be self-learners. And we all really want to grow and to not be passive in where we are. And so we've attracted a bunch of people that grow. And so what's interesting, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more, is we really put the learning onto the individual. And we say, look, we want you to learn. Now we're going to provide you resources and coaching and all that sort of thing, but it's got to be built into you to be hungry to learn. But there's also got to be a desire to not be the expert and the one that everybody salutes to and says, oh, they're doing it right. You know, part of a natural part of this is that you you recognize that there are other people that are doing things that you need to learn from, and that you've never arrived. Our internal phrase is, we're not there yet. And when somebody comes across as they've arrived and they're all that, they probably need to sit down and talk to someone or exit the organization, but that's just not our style.
That approach puts a lot of pressure on to hiring the right people, and we'll talk about this in a moment, but how do you screen for that in the hiring process? Because it seems to be something that if you're pushing a lot of the responsibility to the individual to take care of their own, growth track and career development, then you have to have people who are naturally self-starters. How do you screen for it, or how do you have any hints on that type of approach?
Our filters for hiring, Chris, we call them the 4 C's. The 3 C's were originated elsewhere. We added one, but it's character, chemistry, culture, and competence. And the question you're asking about is really a chemistry fit. And the way I often say it is, we're going to hire people that we're going to work, that are going to be with sometimes more than our own families. And so we encourage people to really figure out, can they get along with the person? Not are they a carbon copy of them or their team, but would you like to go to dinner with them? Would you like to hang out and go to a movie with them? Are they comfortable in their own skin, and how do they fit with the rest of the team? And usually if you've started with a group of people that are self-learners and that are humble, you're not going to hire an arrogant, know-all-that person. So it really is a chemistry fit thing for us.
I love that. What's the goal of creating a learning culture? Is there why have that as part of the organization?
Well, I'd say the primary reason is we just want to create great leaders, and we recognize that we wanted to be poured into as young leaders, and maybe we weren't poured into quite as much as we would prefer. And so we would like to make sure that we're pouring in. It's good for our organization. Ultimately, it's good for the Big C Church and other organizations. And so that's the ultimate goal. Selfishly, if you want to attract great leaders, you better create an environment that they want to work in. And what we found is that really great leaders, they want to be in a learning environment where they're free to exercise their learning muscle and figure out what's next and execute on it and be trusted to execute on it. And so I feel like that's the real benefit to our organization, is we attract and we grow better people that are more capable of doing great things, whether it's in our ministry or elsewhere.
I love that. I think one of the things that's kind of embedded in this idea, right, is, and I've heard you say this about how you run your groups and even, have volunteers, is you see your job as a senior leader in the organization to empower your staff to do the job. And I think especially when we have small organizations, we think our job is to produce the outcomes. Talk a little bit about that approach, because even the way you structure your ministries, I've heard people at North Point say, our job as staff members is not to run the ministries, but to work with the volunteers to run the ministries. And there's a big difference between the two.
There is, and you're exactly right. We want to be an environment where leaders feel like they can spread their wings and they can go do their thing, with coaching, obviously, and oversight. They've got to be aligned missionally with what we're trying to do and strategically. So there's some boundaries, but there's a lot of room for creativity within those boundaries. And so we want to find people that don't just want, you need some people in your organization that just do. In the E-Myth Revisited, Michael Gerber talks about the fact that there's 3 types of people. There's entrepreneurs, there's managers, and there's technicians. Well, oftentimes we fill our organizations with technicians who do, but there's not a place for the entrepreneur who goes, yeah, but let's do it differently. And you can't have all entrepreneurs, you can't have all technicians, you can't have all managers, but if you can have a healthy blend of the 3, then you end up with a highly functioning organization. And all 3 of those types, even though they're wired differently, can still be learners. They may learn how to do what they're doing better. They may learn how to lead better. They may learn how to run a process better. But that's still a learning exercise that we want everybody to develop and to have in their own personal arsenal.
Yeah. And in order to do that, you've got to push more autonomy and decision making down the organization to people closer to the action to make those, important decisions. And one of the things, I don't know if you know this, but actually my first experience with North Point was I think it was 2015. And I'd just come to America. Push Bay was tiny. We had 20 or 25 staff, and we had no right to even be able to talk to North Point. And I was speaking with someone who works for you, Jason, and somehow I got on his calendar and I took him through what we did as an organization. And he was very gracious, gave me a lot of of his time, and he said something that stuck with me. He said, "Chris, I have the autonomy to make this decision." He said, "At North Point, we get given a lot of rope to make these decisions, but also it's enough rope to hang yourself." And I thought, wow, that is such a fascinating decision or approach for someone to make with even, a very small startup back then. So talk to us a little bit about that approach of giving people this autonomy to make what I would think is really, really big decision. And I've interacted with thousands of churches, and I've never had one where someone said, I can make this decision unilaterally. Everyone's like, I got to talk to my board. I got to talk to 8 other people in the organization. And here you are in contrast saying, no, I can make this decision. I'm not going to, but I can. I mean, that seems to be almost radical.
Well, it goes back to the type of person we want to attract, Chris. And somewhat it goes back to who we are as the original leaders of the organization. I don't want to be micromanaged. I've never enjoyed being micromanaged. I'm not going to micromanage my team. But that means I have to hire people that are capable of making great decisions and have high native intelligence. They're curious. They're missionally aligned with our organization. They know, even though Jason could have made that decision, he wouldn't have made it by himself. He would have gone back and communicated it with several other people to make sure he wasn't missing something. But he did have the positional authority to make the decision. And that's, I think, what healthy leaders want. They just don't want to run amok and have no accountability. That's not healthy for anyone. The church landscape is littered with people that had no accountability, and we see where that leads. But on the other hand, you don't want to handcuff people and say, here's the little bit you can do, and here's the very narrow little window you can operate in, because then they'll just leave and go do their own thing. So somehow you have to find a balance between accountability and the ability to run your own program. And you have to have managers that are, Jason's smarter than I am. He's more capable than I am. And I'm not threatened by Jason. I have a team member who technically he works for me, but he's a great leader, and he doesn't really work for anybody. He works in our organization. I manage him. His statement that I love is, I'd rather lead a team full of stallions than a team full of mules. And I absolutely agree with that. I'd rather put up with the racehorse who wants to run off in the wrong direction and has tons of energy and capacity, and every once in a while I'd say, whoa, wait, come back, instead of having to whip somebody to get them to do anything. It's just a much better use of organizational resources. Now, if you're insecure as a manager, it might be threatening, because I've got an organization full of people that can do my job better than me, but I got here first, and I have some embarrassing photos of Andy from college that are still helping me out. So, I'm here, and but I want to hire great people, and they want to work with other great leaders. And fortunately, we found that right balance of accountability, intuitive, leadership skills, high intelligence, self-learning, all those other attributes. And we've got an organization full of them, which is fantastic. Kind of a compliment when people hire somebody away from us, because we created a leader that's really helpful for them. Don't want to lose anybody, but if that's what God has for them, okay. But it's complicating at times, Chris. It's exhausting, but we feel like we've latched onto something that works well, at least for us. Whether it works for everyone else or not, I don't know, but it works well for us.
Talk about the flip side of that, because the kind of implied part is I've been given enough rope to hang myself, implies that there's an accountability for, perhaps making the wrong decision that comes with that.
There is. And I tell my team, look, it's okay to make a mistake. Just don't make the same mistake twice. Learn from your mistakes. But yes, I wrote down in my notes, that one of the things we did was we started a Spanish service at our Alpharetta campus. Nothing wrong with Spanish services. Hope there's lots of Hispanics in our organization. It turns out our organization is in an area of town where we happen to have had a lot of native Spanish speakers who also wanted to speak more fluently in English and more be integrated into the life of our whole community and not pigeonholed into just a Spanish speaking service. Nothing wrong with Spanish speaking services at all. But this group of people that was leading this effort, they said we needed a Spanish speaking service. We did it for about 5 or 6 weeks, and you realize the people that were no longer attending were our leaders that spoke Spanish. And we're like, wait, you said we should do this. They said, yeah, but we don't want to go to a service that only speaks Spanish. We want to be in somewhere where English is the predominant language. And we're like, then how are we going to attract Spanish speakers, you know? And so we just didn't flesh out the idea. We ran before we should have. We expended some resources, but we also realized that and that may be a terrible example, but that's one. The other one that I thought about was we had an internal tool that a really talented staff member created, but it reflected their way of doing one-on-ones with a lot, very task oriented, lots of reminders built in. It reflected their style of leadership. And because of the position they were in, they were able to propagate this tool into the rest of the staff and have an expectation that everybody would use it. Well, it turns out that management style is one management style, but it's not everyone's management style. And so we spent a lot of resources on our digital team creating a tool that it turned out was not adopted by our own team because we didn't do the necessary step of, hey, is this tool going to resonate with all of our managers and work with them? And so it was a great idea. The Spanish service is a great idea. You got to go to the next step though and make sure that it's going to be adopted and utilized by everyone that you want it to be. And that's sometimes we run a little too fast sometimes and execute on ideas before we've done all of our homework at times. At times, Chris, honestly, we go too slow and we miss some opportunities because we're so thorough in some areas. So it's finding the right balance.
Well, I mean, one of the things I think we talked about at a Pushbase Summit a couple of years ago was that you guys were trying Zoom, doing groups over Zoom calls 2 years ago. So, I mean, it's off topic a little bit, but I mean, you were trying that. And so now in this global pandemic, I mean, you've got at least all of these learnings that right. You can then say, well, we either know that, I don't know, what was the end of that? Did Zoom groups end up taking off? I mean, but at least, you've tried something and learned from it, I'm guessing.
What we've learned is that Zoom is a great tool to have in your belt in a group setting, but there is, as everybody knows by now, Zoom fatigue does set in. And but if you are going to have an in-person, for example, my wife and I lead a young married small group, just married small group. When somebody can't be there, oftentimes they say, hey, could you set the computer up or the iPad up and put it in a chair so that we can participate in group because we're going to be out of town, but we don't want to miss group. So it's a great tool in that environment. It's great if you can't meet at all. I'm very proud of our team. Within 2 weeks of the pandemic and us having to shut down, we had Zoom groups established for our children, for our adults, licenses coming out of our ears, and we were able to keep going because we had experimented early on. We've been doing video for a long time now. So for us, flipping the switch to all video teaching versus in-person teaching, we were able to do that quickly. So we made that flip very quickly. And part of it's because we were ready because we had tried a bunch of things. But I'm sure there's some things that we should have tried that we missed. You can't try everything, right?
Yeah. Let's take me back a little bit because, I mean, obviously you operate in a church environment, and this whole model of giving people a lot of autonomy really relies on getting the right people in the team. And, one of the things I've heard, senior leaders say often is, look, we just can't afford to get the kind of people, that's good for you to say, Rick. I mean, you're North Point, you have so many resources. I mean, we're just a small little organization. We can't afford the kind of people that you can get. I mean, what do you say to people like that who say, like there's this, you've got some benefit that you've got additional resources that other organizations don't have?
Honestly, Chris, I don't think that's an objection that has a lot of grounding behind it, because there are people in every spectrum, income bracket, that they're either naturally curious or they're not. And I've seen lots of people that are very successful, but they're so dogmatic, all they can do is tell other people what to do. They would not fit in our culture at all. I've seen operations guys that are curious. On their break, they've got a book in their hands. They're taking advantage of all the learning opportunities they have. They want to better themselves. So I really don't think it's that. I think it comes back to hiring for the right people. And if you really do value this, you will find that they're out there. And it's not an income thing. It's a did you prioritize? I think the mistake that I see most church leaders make is they settle for hiring someone who can do the job, but they don't really look for someone who can make the job better and make the practices better and be naturally curious about why they're doing what they're doing. When church leaders come to us and they have a measuring tape in their hand and they have a camera in their hand and they're taking pictures of what color everything is and how wide the stages are and all that, I'm like, well, that's great. Here, you can measure away. But honestly, I write them off right away because I think you just want to know what we do. But what you've forgotten or maybe never realized is that what we do is born out of why we do it. And so the leader that comes to us and goes, hey, why did you do your service that way? Why did you introduce that topic that way? Why is the environment scheduled this way? Because there's a leader who's going to go, I know how to take the why that North Point's proven works, go back, contextualize it, and make it work in Seattle or the Philippines or wherever it might be, because they understood to ask why instead of what. And so when you find, that's what I would be interviewing for, not just people that can do the job. You can find people that can do the job. You want to find people that are curious, and it's harder to manage those people, Chris. Okay. They ask questions and you find yourself going, just do what I said, but you dare not say that, right? Because you don't want to be told that, So, I just don't be threatened by people that ask questions. That's actually a really good thing as long as they do it respectfully and they want to make your organization better.
I love that. Can you talk about talk about your values and what role do they play in creating this kind of learning environment?
Yeah. So for us, from the very beginning, we talked about what was super important to us, and once we got into the process a couple of years, we realized we'd created a fairly unique environment. And so we went through an exercise where we said, and we'd done an initial exercise about values, but we revisited it and we said, hey, now that we've learned this, instead of just talking about a value system for the whole church, let's talk about a value system for our staff. What causes people to want to be here? What holds us all together? What are things, practices that if we stop doing, that would cause us to go, okay, this has just become a job. I don't want to do it anymore. What are those core things that are super, super important? And we've gone through this exercise a couple of times, honestly, Chris, and it's really long. You get lots of input and feedback from across your entire staff, but we were able to distill it down into our common, what we call them now is our common commitments. And I think this is where what you're asking about is, and by the way, just so you'll know, there's quite a bit of diversity of thought and even practical application of doctrine on our staff. So we make sure people understand that, what's really core to us, and you hear us talk about it all the time, is the resurrection. And there's lots of other ancillary issues, but we want people to agree on who the person of Jesus is, and that's who we're pointing people toward. And the resurrection is the critical event that causes us to cement our faith. And obviously there's some other core things, but then there's a lot of things that a lot of churches focus on that we just allow to slide and let people have different opinions. So I'm not talking about those things necessarily, but these are commitments to us. And so I'll just, if you don't mind, if you've got a second, we give out a little cube. There's 6 of them. We give out a little cube and it has these 6 things on it. And there's an accompanying question for each one. And I'll be glad to make this available to your audience if you want, for them to come up with their own version. Remember to ask why, not what. Don't take our values and strap them on. Find out what's important to you and come up with your own questions. And maybe this is a clue for that. The first one for us is take it personally. How am I personally engaged in our mission and vision? Because if you get to where you're just doing the job of church, but you're not engaged in it personally, you're probably walking the walk. You're probably talking the talk, but you're not walking the walk. Make it better. This is super important for us. Actually, I like Carey Nieuwhof a little better. He says, don't settle for mediocrity, but make it better. What am I doing personally to help us improve organizationally? And so that's great for the process-oriented stuff. There are some people that, as one of my team members says, that we tend to shine cannonballs from time to time. You know, the purpose of the cannonballs to knock a wall down. Doesn't really matter how shiny it is. And so when you find yourself shining up cannonballs, you're like, well, maybe we've overdone it a little bit. And there's some overdoing it, but it causes us to make things better and excellence in our organization. Collaborate. Where am I leveraging the talent and skills of staff outside my primary team? In other words, reach outside of my team walls, go across the organization, figure out how to ask questions and invite other ideas to come in, because we find out when we bring a digital person into a children's discussion, sometimes there's an insight, or vice versa. There's an insight that you wouldn't have had otherwise. Replace ourselves. This has been core to us since the beginning. Who am I empowering? Always look for someone below me to replace what I'm doing. Now, some people are threatened by that, and they feel like, you know, well, gosh, if I replace myself, where am I going to go? What we found is, if you're capable of replacing yourself, you're capable of doing bigger things. And I don't know of anybody that's worked themselves out of a job. There's always been somewhere for them to go to do something bigger and better. Stay fit. How am I taking care of myself spiritually, physically, relationally, financially, and emotionally? You know, because we want healthy people, and all of us are challenged. But if we are really focused on staying fit, then we find out that you're a better employee. And then the last one's not so much of a command as it is just a mindset, and it's remain open-handed. How do I manage the tension triggered by new ideas, innovation, and change? It sometimes if you feel yourself threatened, you're like, wait a second, why am I threatened by this new idea? How should I process? I should not be threatened. I should be curious. But remaining open-handed, there's a lawyer, I forget who he is now, but his advice to his clients was, if you're in a subpoena or something like that, put your hands underneath the conference table, open your palms up and put them on the bottom of the conference table, and then answer the question. There's something about your hands being open that calms you down and causes you not to be aggressive and defensive. So those are our 6. There's probably 6 better ones. If you borrow ours, just send us back your improvements so that we can look at them and see what we missed.
You mentioned the word curious several times. What does that mean, and how do you know if the people working for you are being curious?
That's a great question. I'd say you're curious if you find yourself going, why did you say that? And what were you thinking? Rather than always wanting to defend your position. You know, if you never find yourself asking someone what they meant, or how did they think of that, or if you don't recognize that there are other people that are smarter than you, and there are people that are smarter than you. There's people smarter than, I guess there's one smartest person in the world. We just don't know who he or she is yet, but everybody else is subservient to that. Maybe it's Bill Gates. Maybe we should ask Bill. But you know, but you should always find yourself going, like Chris, I'm always fascinated by, you know, why you think the way you do. You're a great leader. You know, you've innovated. I remember when you came up with your 1-question survey for PushPay, you know, and I'm like, that's brilliant, you know, and you drew all kinds of insights out of that. And so we've done a version of that, not nearly as elegant as yours, but you know, there's great ideas floating around there all over the place. So that's one of the reasons we read books. You know, one of the digs we get is that we're too corporate because we read business books and talk about them. And I'm like, well, yeah, but I just think these business leaders happen to capture God's truth that he originally authored, and they put it into a business format. We're just reclaiming it for the gospel. And so I love reading Lencioni and Gerber and Collins and Buckingham and all them, because I think they have great insights. And they're not always all right, but there's a lot of great learning that you can have from that. And so that's a part of being curious too.
I love that. Let's double click on that a little bit, because I mean, from what I've heard and from Andy's podcast, seems like, you know, you read a lot of books, and obviously, you know, it's encouraged to for the whole team to read them, and you kind of you give them out to people. Obviously, it sounds like you buy them for people, and you say, look, hey, we're going to go through this a chapter at a time together as a team and have discussions around it. Talk about that, the structure around it, who selects the book, how often do you do it? Love to kind of double click on that some.
Sure. So generally speaking, the leader selects the book, but not always. And we encourage people as they read privately and personally, if they come across something, share it, tell us. And that's the way a lot of the ideas happen, is the team members read and goes, wow, this would really benefit our whole team. I would say usually a book, we would read it because it either puts an idea in a new light that could be beneficial to us. It brings a new idea to the table, a new learning that we've never heard of before that has practical ministry implications. It could be something that's a course correction and something that we just need to refresh ourselves on. And sometimes it's just we read because we need to focus on a spiritual aspect that we need to become more healthy in, and it's a challenge spiritually. So it could be anyone. I would say typically it's the leader. And then I would say the way it practically works is almost everybody in our organization, one of the things we have to battle against, Chris, is we meet too often. So we're constantly carving back meetings. But what we found is that when we meet and we can talk about relational things like what's going on in your how should we be praying for you and learning together, it takes time. And so our organization's a bit messy, and it's because it's highly relational, but that relational lubrication that you have sees us through some really difficult times when people don't see things exactly the same way. And there's many times we don't. So reading's one of those, and it gives us a common reference point. So usually a team leader or someone the team leader appoints will walk us through a book, and they're the ones that have done the prep. They ask questions. I always say that doing a book discussion like that, whoever's leading the discussion is a bit like leading a difficult small group. You've got people that talk too much, like me, and you have to tone them down. Then you've got people that you have to pry every word out of them. So you have to say, hey, Chris, come on, talk, tell me what you're thinking. You have to be able to camp out on the points that are really salient. You have to cut the rabbit trails as short as possible, and there's always a rabbit trail. And then you have to actually say, hey, that's a point that we need some learning about. Can you come back next week, do some research, and talk to us about that point? And so it's an active learning thing. You somewhat know where you're going and how long it's going to take. But Chris, there have been times when books have taken us months to go through because they're so rich. And then there's been times we've abandoned books because they're like, okay, we really only want to read chapters 2 and 7. And that's okay, because sometimes the stuff's just not that practical. And then I'd say then it takes the discipline of the leader to say, okay, what points do we want to now implement in our organization, or at least begin to implement? And then a really successful read is a group comes back and starts to tell the rest of the organization, wow, you can't believe the Chris Heaslip book we just read. You've got to read it. And those books start to circulate through the whole organization and become common learning. So there's probably a dozen or so books that I would say are ones that have had significant influence on our organization over the years, that now when new people come into the organization and say, well, I want to learn, like, well, these should be on your reading list. And we have a library, we'll provide them for them, because it's super important for them to get on the same page with everybody else around the learnings we have around those books.
I love that. We have the same. We actually have 5 books that we give every new hire. Now we're, FedExing them out to them. And so when they get their welcome packet, there's 5 books nicely kind of wrapped up there in a little package. And then the other thing that I did a pushback, and we do it here at Leader as well, is we have something called the CEO Book Club. And so if you find a book that you think would be helpful in your job, you send us the Amazon link and we'll buy it for you. And I just figure, look, if we can't get $20 of value from a book, then we're doing something wrong. And so, the ROI can be 10,000 times on one good idea from $20 of cost. So absolutely, I think everyone should adopt that. It's just, the cost to benefit is just, enormous.
Yeah, we have personal development budgets or staff development budgets, and we give people wide latitude in what to do with those around learning exercises. And so That's one of them. I never have a problem when I'm approving expenses to see people buying books, because they're stretching their minds. I may not love what they're reading, but that's okay, because it may turn out I need to read that book.
Exactly. So talk to us, in addition to reading books, other kind of growth tracks that you have. What's the most common ways that you want to have your leaders invest in their teams?
Gosh. All right. So I'm going to answer the second part first. I don't know there is a most common way, Chris. It's and maybe if there was somebody smarter leading this part of our organization, I could figure that out. But I can tell you that we've found that if we give enough tools and we coach the managers well enough, that we can provide a path for almost everyone. And I'll settle in on so let me give you some of the ways, and then we focus on something new that we're trying. So some of the things we do a daily, we actually move someone into a position that's basically a staff culture development officer. And they create a staff Instagram post for every day, that it might be a skill set, it might be a spiritual component, but there's something aimed at staff every day. We do lots of 360 interviews so that people can get feedback from their teams. And then we pay outside coaches, sometimes internal coaches, to interpret the results. We use Right Path as a personality tool, and we spend a lot of time talking about how strengths and weaknesses, group team interactions based on Right Path profiles, and explains to a lot of people. And you could use whichever other one of the personality profiles you want. They all do that sort of thing. Right Path's the one we've settled on. We have staff coaches. We have people that are older and wiser that we basically say, hey, sometimes you're going to have a problem with your manager or somebody on your team, and you can't talk to them about it. Here's somebody inside the organization, but out of your direct line of reporting, you can go talk to anonymously and just figure out, is this normal? And or is this just something I need to talk about and get it off my chest? So we do that. And those people get utilized a lot. We are very intentional about our new employee orientation. We call the program Align. So we take the stuff that was most core to our DNA, and our senior staff talks at it. I've had to move it online because of COVID. But so that's this time it was 3 2-hour sessions. Normally it's a day or a day and a half of concentrated learning. I've already mentioned development budgets. We have 6 all-staff meetings that everybody comes to every year. We have this guy you may have heard of named Andy Stanley that teaches at those. He's pretty good. You ought to listen to him sometime. Then each campus has 2 or 3 monthly campus, or in my team, staff meetings, and there's sometimes a development component of those. I'd say once out of those 3, there's a development component. We pay for seminary training for people that are on a pastoral track, and talking about a learning experience. There's one for you. And development. We even provide for outside counseling, Chris, when somebody gets themselves, they're just emotionally, they need help, and they need to have a confidential conversation to get healthy. We do that. And there's some stuff I'm missing. The one that I didn't mention in that role is we've now created something we call the NPM leadership track. And there's basically, after all these years, we finally figured out, okay, here's the most common stuff. And so there's 7 1-hour courses and these are all done by video, that you can learn about management skills, about or developing as a manager, about how to lead a team and how to lead yourself. And we let people sign up for those tracks. And we're doing those now 3 times a year. And I think there's a cap and there's a learning community attached to each one as well. And so that's probably the most organized, direct way that we've and toward those 3 components. So we do, I don't know, some people say we overdo it, Chris, but we really do value development, and that's what but to take advantage of any of those, you need the desire to learn and grow yourself, and then we've given you lots of opportunities to exercise that muscle.
Maybe this is a difficult question, but have you ever thought about how to track the ROI on that? I mean, there's one part of it that says you should do this because, this is our culture and we value learning, so therefore we're going to do it anyway. But I don't know if you've ever thought about, hey, how do we track this? Are we overdoing it or underdoing it? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, that's the way I'm wired, Chris. That's the way you're wired. I haven't been able, it's so subjective. I've not been able to figure out a way. I just know that when we invest in people, they come back and we get feedback from their team members and from their managers. And we're like anybody else. You see people that are improving and growing, they hit a bump and we help them get past it. And all of a sudden they're a much better leader. And then we have people that they go through everything we can throw at them and they don't get any better. But I have not figured out a way to create an ROI on it. There probably is a way. Maybe that's what people management software should do, is create an ROI so you can tell the effectiveness of it. Yeah, that's a great question. And no, we have not.
Yeah, no, I think it's hard. I mean, Andy Grove talks about in his one of his books, he was the CEO of Intel. He had this kind of framework that even if you could get someone to be 1% better, over the lifetime of that employee, the return basically becomes almost as close to infinite as you can get. So I think that hypothetically it's understandable, but it's just in practice, it's very hard to track. And ultimately all you can do is say, did the employee feel like they were growing as part of it? Is as close as we can get.
I don't know if this answers your question or not, but one thing we do tell all of our employees when they come on board is we want this to be the best job that you've ever had. That's our goal to you. We're not saying we will be the best job you ever had. We just want to be the best job you've ever had. So we do an exit interview with every single person that's left, and we ask them, did we fulfill on our promise? And even with people that have left, sometimes not under the great circumstances, the majority of them say, yes, you have created the best. And people, they leave. People leave our organizations, just like they leave any. And I like to believe that people stay. And by the way, we do a 3-month and a 12-month review that goes directly back to Andy's office and ask them very specific questions about how they're enjoyed the role, were they equipped to do the role, what feedback do they have. So we're getting feedback from people, and it's pretty candid. One thing, when you hire leaders, they tell you what they think, and which is good. And so I think we could probably use some of that feedback, Chris, to determine whether or not we're making progress in this area, especially over time.
I love that. Do you have any software that helps to manage any of the process or that helps facilitate this employee growth kind of approach?
Sadly, no, Chris. I'd love to tell you that we did. We have the standard tools that, tell us where everybody is and what they've done, but I don't know that we have anything that we've become comfortable with that really points people, and says, okay, here's the track you're going to follow. It's still very organic, which is probably, that's something we could probably do better, honestly.
Cool. As we get kind of towards the end, Rick, I'd love to ask you if you have any just generic advice. Imagine someone who's just starting a new organization, and they say, I really would love to create this type of learning and growth culture that you have at North Point. Can you give those folks some advice on how they should think about creating that culture from the ground up?
Yeah. Well, you said the magic word already. You said you have someone who wants to do it. They recognize there's a need and they want to implement this kind of culture. Hopefully, that person's the positional leader in the organization, because it's always easiest if the head of the organization is the vision cast for this. If it's not them, you certainly need someone that has influence with the senior leader, or it can run their team in that way and has the autonomy to do so. I've always said that Andy's primary gift in our organization is he's the guy that climbs up in the crow's nest of the ship, and he looks out over the horizon to see what's coming and yells down what's going on down below to make sure that if there's rocks ahead or there's clear sailing or there's a storm. And then ultimately, that person's the captain of the ship that can then say, okay, we need to get ready. We need to do this. We need to do that. So to me, you've got to have a vision caster for this process in the organization, because it's a long-term process. We've been doing it for 25 years and we're not there yet. So it's not something you strap on for 6 months and go, there, we're done. It's something that you've got to really put your nose to the grindstone and keep doing. And then you need to have an honest conversation about your organization. I think you heard me say a little bit ago, and when we did our culture and our values decision, it boiled down to, hey, what are the things that if we stop doing, we'd all quit? Because we can get a paycheck anywhere. It's like, what is really unique to our organization and how do we guard that thing? I think that process of figuring out what that is and then how to supplement that and to grow that and to become a better organization is super, super important. And it needs to trickle down into the entire organization and feedback up. I think one of the important parts of that process was we got feedback from everybody in the organization, and they had the opportunity to give us feedback, so that we really heard from all parts of the organization before we made our final call on what we wanted to stick with our values. And then you got to come up with a plan, and fortunately there's lots of great organizations like yours, like ours, some other great churches, some other great organizations. Even, go look at the tech industry, the Googles and the Apples of the world. They do a lot of really good things with how they develop their teams and come up with a plan. And if you need to copy somebody's to start, great, but be willing to tailor it as you look at the results and find out, are we really creating the appetite that we want? And I think it'll ultimately come down to, and this will be tough, you're going to have some people that adopt that and they just thrive in that environment. And you're going to have some other people that you can tell this is not their cup of tea. And those are people you're ultimately going to have some difficult conversations with, and because you really need this to be an all skate, if at all possible. So there's some thoughts, and I'm sure there's other ways to look at it as well. But that's how I would advise someone if they came to me saying, here's just some basic things to start thinking about.
I love that. One last question on this before we move to some of the quickfire questions. Do you have any advice? Did you ever find someone maybe on the leadership team who just didn't buy into this approach, or, and maybe, if that, maybe not your organization, but let's imagine, we're at a smaller church and we have someone on the leadership team who just is, resistant or suspicious of thinking about this kind of culture change. Like, what would you do in this hypothetical situation?
Well, the first thing I do is I would honestly, and I use the word confront, but I mean it in love, that person, and say, hey, I noticed that this seems to be a problem for you. This you don't seem to resonate with this topic like some of the other team members do. And I would have that conversation. It's interesting. Lencioni actually wrote a book about this. Ideal Team Player would be a great exercise to go through because it talks about people that don't quite fit in with the team. And, ultimately, Chris, you've led organizations, you people have to pivot toward the way the leadership wants to go. And our organizations, no organization is the best place for everyone. You really need to find a culture that fits you best. And so if you have to have a difficult conversation ultimately with someone, we use the euphemism, we free their future, but it's really true. You really free someone to find another organization they align with better, and you fill that hole with someone who aligns with you. And if you get a team full of people that are all going in the same direction, it's a powerful thing. I often talk about, we have people that come on our team and they leave and they take for granted the organizational momentum that we have. And they don't realize that they're riding on the SS North Point. And they get in their own kayak and they're rowing by themselves and they're watching this big old ship just vanish into the distance. And it's because you've got all these team members that are pulling in the same direction. It's a very powerful thing. And you also sometimes take it for granted. And so I would just encourage people to get as many people on the team pulling together and ultimately everyone pulling together. And I think that's a huge win for your organization. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
It does. No, I mean, one of the things, and you can't do it every time, but, if you have a team who, people aren't a team player and you select a book to read and you say, hey, we're going to read this book, The Ideal Team Player, then you can really bring some of those issues to the surface. And the good thing is, it's not you saying it. It's not, hey, Chris is saying this or Rick is saying this. Oh, it's Lencioni. I mean, and he knows what he's talking about. So we should listen to him. Now you can't do it all the time because then, people get to, well, Chris or Rick chose this book because they understand that someone on our team is not living up to this. But, once every now and then you can do that. And I find that as a really helpful approach of using a book to create a conversation around something like that.
Right. And as a leader, Chris, I think we both know the more we admit our own faults and our own need to grow, the more it empowers the rest of the team to go, oh, I don't have to hide out. I can be honest about my strengths, my abilities, where I need help, because Chris was honest about his. And that's just leadership by example, right? And it's humility in action, and people follow and resonate with that.
I love that. Okay, 5 questions, Rick, the quick fire round. So the first question is, what is the best book that you've ever read apart from the Bible?
The one I always keep coming back to is an oldie but a goodie. It's the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. It just resonates on so many levels. So read it.
Yeah, and sharpen the saw is what we're talking about here today. Okay, number 2, if you could use one word to describe your leadership style, what would it be?
Oh, I didn't read the quick questions in advance, Chris. A delegator. I don't know if that's the right word or not, but I don't have a great one for that. How do you answer that? I hope it's humble, but how do you say you're humble and say it without being non-humble?
You can say empowering.
All right, empowering. I'll say empowering.
So this is the same thing, right? Like it's, giving people
True.
The latitude to do it.
All right, sorry.
Okay, third one. What is your biggest distraction working from home?
Oh, sports on TV. The Masters is on right now, and how can I not watch?
Well, I'm sorry for dragging you away for a little bit. Okay, number 4. Tell us about a time when someone believed in you when really they shouldn't have.
Yeah. So I can give a little bit of a story.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when I was working at First Baptist Atlanta, there was a guy named Sid Hopkins that was the administrator. And I went to him and I said, "Hey, Sid, I'm finished with undergrad school. I majored in finance and I'm ready to go to grad school. And I'm either going to major in accounting or information systems." And Sid this was way back in the early 80s. And Sid looked at me and he said, "Rick, there's lots of people in the church that understand the use of finances, but there's not very many that understand the use of technology." He said, "I think I'd go that route." I did. A year later, he hired me to run their fledgling IT department, and that really turned everything on its head. He had no business hiring me to do that role. I was still in school, but he did. He believed in me, and then he gave me a chance. I spent a lot of money on a white paper. I created a white paper convincing them to spend a lot of money to bring something in that was outsourced that saved them tons of money and changed the whole trajectory of the operational side of the organization. And I never would have done it if Sid hadn't given me a chance.
I love that. One of the things, I love saying to people is, many years from now, we're going to forget a lot of the victories we had. We're going to forget, a lot of the successes, but what we're going to remember is the times that people believed in us. I think that it's so important. It's one of the most underrated aspects of leadership is just believing in people and telling someone, I believe in you. And look, maybe you're not qualified right now, but I believe that you can, learn and grow and grow into the role. And I just think that, someone like that believing in you can change the whole trajectory of your life and your career.
Which goes back to your empowering word, which is the right word that I find myself wanting to do, because I want to give other people that, the same opportunities that I had. But I do it after I've filtered them. They're highly intelligent. They're learning. They're cultural fits with our organization. So it's like, okay, it's time to give you a whole plate of responsibility. And oftentimes they're like, and I'm like, no, you can do this. I'll be here. I'll coach you, but you're good. Jason's that. Brenda, my HR director, is that. Gary, my accounting director, is that. I mean, we have loads of great people that produce way beyond my capacity to produce. And we're a better organization because they had a chance.
I love that. Okay, the last question here. You've obviously had a front row seat to see North Point grow over the years, but also, you've had a chance to interact with some truly world-class leaders. What's something or a couple of characteristics that you've seen that those leaders exhibit that you could share with us?
The biggest one that comes to mind immediately is that they love people. The leaders that I know that have knocked my socks off, they know a lot of content, but the ones that really stay with me long term are the ones that genuinely love and care about people, and they demonstrate that personally. And then the other thing is humility. I've done this, I'm 61, I've done this a long time. I've been in ministry, honestly, Chris, since I was 17 years old. And I've seen a lot of people that are false, and they make a big show about themselves, but it doesn't take long to be around them and you're like, yeah, I don't want to be like you. But when you get to know someone, and the more you get to know them, the more you want to be like them, that's a big deal. And there are people like that out there, despite the fact the media obsesses around the ones that fall. There's a lot of people that are going to finish the race well, and I want to hang out with those people.
I love that. Well, Rick, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for making the time and sharing your experiences with us. I really appreciate it.
Well, Chris, thank you for creating great organizations. Even more, thank you for being such a great friend. You're a quality person, and I enjoy every interaction I have with you.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Principles in Practice. Don't forget to check out the links in the description below for more information about Rick this week. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button on your way down there and to keep up with all of our latest content. That's it for this episode, and we'll see you again next week.